In this video, I take this bathroom from our 3ds Max Interior Visualizations 3.0 training, from a simple setup to this final image. Camera, lighting, materials, and post-production, all in one workflow. Let's get started. I like to work directly in the viewport first and then create a camera from that view. It's a very convenient method and I find it faster, especially for interiors, which can sometimes be tricky to frame. We'll also be working with a 16:9 aspect ratio, so if we enable that in the viewport, we'll get an accurate preview of the future render. You can use the Shift+F shortcut to enable and disable safe frames. Before touching any camera settings, I first want to decide where I want the viewer to look. I like to start with a composition like this, where the bathtub is placed roughly in the center of the image. We also see a bit of the toilet on the side, but it will stay darker, so the main focus remains in the center. At the same time, we have a little of the basin in the foreground and the shower in the background, which gives us some nice depth and layering. That makes the image much more interesting than a flatter composition. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage, because we'll still refine it later. Once the view feels right, we can create a Corona camera from it. To do so, you have to create a Corona camera, and when it's selected, press the Ctrl+C shortcut. Now that we have the camera, the first thing I want to set up is the focal length. Personally, I prefer a slightly narrower focal length for interiors. Something like 50mm or 55mm usually works better here. Let's try 50mm. The only issue is that with a 50mm lens, we need to move the camera quite far back to fit the scene into the frame. But in architectural visualization, that's not really a problem, because we can simply use camera clipping and cheat it a little. The camera can stand outside the room, while everything between the camera and this clipping line gets hidden. So distance is not a problem. This is a very useful trick for smaller interiors, because we don't have to compromise the focal length just because the room is too small. The main thing I want to adjust next is the camera height. I'll set it to around 100 centimeters. I usually don't like placing the camera too high in interior scenes. A level view from too high up starts to feel almost like an aerial shot, and it doesn't look very natural. 100 centimeters is a good height here. That way, we still see a little bit of the top of the basins. If we go lower than that, we end up looking from below them, which feels strange to me. After that, I'll raise the camera target a little bit. Then I'll enable vertical tilt, so even though the target is no longer perfectly aligned with the camera, all the vertical lines remain straight. Now we can fine-tune the camera to improve the composition. You can also use the Image Comp Helper script if you want extra help with composition. Something like this works quite nicely. The focus stays in the center and the framing feels balanced. I'll adjust the camera's target a bit. I also like the fact that some objects slightly overlap each other in the foreground. For example, this part of the basin partially covers the towel, which adds more depth to the image. I usually prefer that over showing everything 100% clearly, because a bit of overlap makes the scene feel more natural and visually interesting. This is a small detail, but it makes the image feel much less staged. I almost always add a bit of depth of field as well. I can lower the f-stop to around 5.6, so this area stays in focus while the rest becomes slightly blurred. The bath, flowers, and lamps can stay sharp, and the rest can be a little bit blurred. I will adjust the target distance a little bit. The camera is ready, so now let's go straight into the lighting. I like to start with a Corona sun. Usually, placing it at around 90-degree angle to the camera works best. Let's start an interactive render. Right now, as you can see, we only have the sun and the shadows are really dark because there is no sky. The next step is to add the Corona sky as well, so we get something like this. You can also move the sun a bit lower to create more of an afternoon mood. With the default setup, the shadows are too harsh. A very quick fix is to increase the size of the sun. The larger the light source, the softer the shadows. And with that one simple step, we instantly get much nicer lighting. This setup simulates the sun being behind clouds, so the light is less direct and also less intense. Because of that, we can lower the intensity a bit as well. I still want to add some extra light to enhance the atmosphere. So let's add some Corona lights. I'll start with a disk light. You can align it without affecting the Z position and then set the correct height manually. Now we can duplicate it. In this case, make sure it's an instance, because I want to control these lights together later. After adjusting all 3 lights, I'll copy the light again. I want to control these lights separately, so this time I will use the copy option. This will be the ceiling light. I'll make 2 extra lights here. This time, these will be instances. Finally, let's add a rectangle light behind the mirror. We don't have to extend it all the way to the right side, because that part won't be visible in the camera. This size is enough. Once all the lights are in place, we can set up light mix. You can also access it in the render settings here. As I mentioned before, we want to use instance lighting, and that's why we paid attention to how we copied the lights. Now we can click Generate, and Corona will automatically create separate light mix elements for all these different lights. I'm going to delete these 3 elements here. They come from the lamp material, but we don't see them directly in the view, so I don't need them. They will stay on the rest layer, which will be turned off. I rename the light mix layers and start interactive rendering. When I work with additional lighting, I like to adjust one group at a time. Let's start with the pendant lights. I'll increase their intensity a little bit and make them warmer. And here, I want to show you one small difference that can make your warm lighting look much more natural. Let's say we set the light temperature here to 3500 Kelvin. I will duplicate the preview so we can compare it later on. We can use a selection filter to select only the lights. And next, we can reset the color to white and set up the temperature directly in the light settings. As you can see, setting the temperature directly in the light settings usually gives a much nicer result. The light looks warmer and more natural, while the light mix version tends to become more yellowish, which in my opinion doesn't look as good. So I prefer to use the light mix to quickly find the right temperature, set it in the light settings, and then, if needed, fine-tune it slightly afterward. I adjusted the values of the other lights as well. For the mirror light, I want something slightly cooler, let's say around 4000 Kelvin. The mirror light is much too strong, so I'll reduce it to 0.15 and then check how it looks together with the environment. The toilet area lighting is also too strong. I want the edges of the image to stay darker, and I want to guide the viewer's attention toward the bath in the center. If we make everything equally bright, the image becomes less interesting. It feels flatter, more boring, and the composition becomes weaker because the viewer doesn't know where to look. Lighting is not only about illumination, it also helps shape the composition. You can use it to direct the viewer's eye exactly where you want it to go. I also think the sun might still be a bit too strong, so I'll lower it slightly as well. If you want to learn how to create more images like this one from start to finish, join our 3ds Max Interior Visualizations 3.0 training, now available for pre-order. Now let's add the materials and see how this lighting works in actual scene. In this example, we don't have many materials to create. We only need a material for the walls, the floor, this panel, which is very simple, and also for the bathtub and the basin. I'll use the Polygon material library by using their 3ds Max script. Below the video, I'll link the tutorial where I show how to use it in case you don't know. Of course, most of the assets are paid, although there are also some free ones. If you're on a budget and just want to follow the tutorial, you can also use Chaos Cosmos materials. These days, creating materials is much easier than it used to be. Instead of building everything from scratch, you can simply use a good material library, import the assets, and save a lot of time. Now let's search for materials we'll use for walls. Then you can choose which resolution you want to download and import. I'll go with 4K. Now we can import it into the scene. Now we need to add a UVW map modifier, switch it to box, and enable real-world map size. Polygon materials come with exact dimensions set up inside the material, so you don't have to worry about setting it up here in the UVW modifier. That already looks quite good, but by default the displacement is turned off, so I'll add a subtle amount of displacement as well. We have to go from a negative value to a positive value, because if we only add a positive value, we would have issues around the chamfers. Let's increase the displacement a little bit. Okay, that already looks better. With the UVW map, you can see that we have a visible hard edge here. In that case, it's better to press 1 to access the gizmo, so you can adjust the mapping more precisely and control how the texture flows across the object. I usually align it in a way that gives me a clear reference point, and then I can rotate or move it, so the texture continues more naturally across the surface. That way, the result looks much better. Also, if you notice repetition in areas like this and this, it's a good idea to add an Edit Poly modifier. You can select these two parts, copy the UVW map modifier, and paste it on top. Then, when you move the mapping, the texture will shift differently on each piece, so the tiling becomes much less visible. A quick tip. If you don't have time to build a full material setup, but you want a similar color, you can simply apply the material without any UVW mapping. It will still look fine, just much simpler. Basically, only a flat color, without texture detail or displacement. Of course, you can build the material properly from scratch, but sometimes this quicker method saves time and still gives you a decent result. And honestly, even that already looks pretty good. It's just a simple color, without displacement and without textures. Now, for the bathtub, I use the Terrazzo material. I add the UVW map modifier, but I think the texture is too large, so we can quickly fix it with the UVW X-Form modifier. I'll set it to 1.5 on each side, which makes the texture appear smaller. Okay, we can also copy this setup, paste it here, and apply the same material. Now let's see how it looks in the render. It looks alright, but I also want to add a bit of displacement here. I also think we can add a color correction map and desaturate the texture a little bit, so it becomes less colorful. Maybe I'll also make it slightly brighter. I like to use the Advanced tab and adjust the gain, gamma, and contrast. That makes the material a bit lighter and less saturated. For the floor, I used Floor Generator plugin together with Multi-Texture Map. As I've already shown this method on my channel, I'll link the full tutorial below this video as well. That looks good. And that's basically it. Very simple, very quick, but the final effect is really nice. And one more thing. As you can see, the towels are a bit too dark, so we can use a quick trick and add a corona light. In this case, I'll use a sphere light and place it somewhere around here. Then we can exclude everything except the towels. You can also disable these two visibility options, so the sphere light itself won't be visible in the render. Here, change the mode from exclude to include, and make sure only the towels are affected. We can also add this light to the render elements. In Light Select, click Add, and then select this light. I'll call it Towels. Now we can adjust it. I'll lower the intensity a bit and maybe make it slightly warmer as well. Okay, now we can see a bit more detail in the towels and they no longer look so dark. I can still fine-tune it later because at this stage it may not be fully visible yet. Now we're ready for the final render. Okay, this is the final image and it turned out really well. For the post-production, I think the image is slightly too yellow, so I'll lower the white balance a bit to make it feel slightly cooler. Then I'll increase the contrast a little. Maybe around 1.5 or 2, just slightly. I'll also desaturate the image a little bit. Next, I'll make it slightly darker. That's it for the basic adjustments, but we can also add a few extra refinements. In most cases, I like to add filmic mapping and increase the shadow richness a bit more. I use this almost all the time because it helps the image pop and gives it a bit more depth. I also like to add my usual LUTs from lens distortions. For example, something like this works nicely. Usually, these LUTs are too strong by default, so I lower the intensity. The effect is very subtle, but I like that it adds a slight bluish tone and shifts the orange areas a little more toward red, which gives the image a more polished look. You can also add a vignette, maybe around 0.7. And with the vignette, we can actually make the image feel a little brighter again. That's basically it. We don't even need to go into Photoshop for this one. And this is the final result. If you enjoyed this workflow, check out our free DS Max Interiors Visualizations 3.0 training, where I show you how to create more images like this one from start to finish. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next one. Bye bye!